This is the bottom pond, which I'm going to be changing. I'm going to make the pond itself about twice the size, and I'm going to make it a more sheltered spot. I mean, south is pretty much behind me, so that's kind of north in that direction. So you can see it's like a parabolic shape that's oriented to the south to pick the sun up. And eventually, once the shelter belt has grown a bit, it'll be a very protected space, and I'll be able to get away with growing things that won't necessarily do well outside of it, because if the wind catches them, it just gets a bit much occasionally here, as it is at the minute anyway. So the plan is to extend this whole excavation pretty much under where I'm stood here now, and that'll make it about at least twice the size, and it'll be a really protected space. I'm really pleased with the way it's worked so far, so it's hoping it'll continue to work. One of the problems I've had with it though, come over here, is because I've got a gap in that berm. It was just, done for aesthetics mostly, the shape of this, but because I got the gap in the berm where the spillway is, so this picks up overland flow, directs it into the pond. When the pond gets over full, it's got a monk fitted to it now, I'll show you that in a minute, but before that was fitted, the idea was that if it got over full, the water would fill the pond, creep up across the whole area, backflood up this ditch, and then slowly and easily spill over the edge there, causing no erosion, no problems, dissipate it over the wider landscape. Which, it never actually did. It got pretty close to it, but it never actually did it. But what happens is the water comes up until it's about a foot off the deck, maybe off the ground level. So once it gets to about 6 inches of the topsoil itself wicks that water away. So there's no erosion at all. It literally wicks and dissipates through the whole, everything downstream of it, everything downhill of it. So that kind of works. But this gap here, ignore the pipe, we'll come to that in a minute. This gap here tends to channel the wind a little bit. So it's not quite as protected as it should be. So that's what this pipe's for. So what I'm going to do is this berm here, it's a bit wider on that side than it was over there. I like the shape of it, and I had a load of soil to get rid of, so I just stacked it onto the back there and it sort of stayed. That's going to be moved over here, so this then will continue through the point where I'm standing and backing up now. That topsoil on that berm there will be stacked on the top of it as well, and with the excavation made bigger around here, with the pond extended, but not across the whole area, I want to be able to grow things in it as well. That's going to be a really sheltered space already as soon as it's done. Once the trees, which we've got a few thousand around the site, once the trees get high enough to give us shelter year round, even in winter, this space down the bottom here will be really, really protected. It's not often we don't have any kind of breeze here, so insects shouldn't be much of a problem, and on the odd occasion they do. Well, I just don't work down in here, so kind of like a crater garden, but with a pond in it, which in summer will be thermal mass for a moderating effect, and it makes a huge difference to the temperature. It's got a load of straw on it at the minute. It's a fairly new pond. It was only put in last year. Last year was a drought year, so nothing really happened much. It struggled basically. There was very little water in it. I had a couple of fish in it, but and they did perfectly well. But what happened was, because the plants didn't get a chance to get set up last year, they just sort of survived really. Nothing really, the pond didn't mature, so it's still quite a young pond. So of course in the spring, new pond syndrome hit. We had loads of algae. Now the straw is barley straw, which some people swear blind makes a huge difference and releases an algicide and takes care of it that way and all the rest of it. Opinions are out on whether that works or not. I decided, belt and braces, if you just break up a bale and chuck it on the surface, it spreads out and covers the surface of the water. It gives the fish a bit of safety. They prefer it with a bit of cover on the surface. Well, everything in the pond does. The plants will come through it anyway, and because a mature pond has got a significant amount of surface cover on it, which reduces evaporation, it means the things below it are happier. They're used to growing in shade. The fish don't feel quite so exposed. They're happier, and you just get much less algae because you haven't got the light penetration. And that's really having an effect. Whether it's the algicide effect, I couldn't tell you. But I'm happy with that. I'll definitely do that again on new ponds. Looks a bit odd at first, but it definitely works. So this is the monk. Now, underlying the whole croft, there's a series of land drains which run about 2.5 foot below the ground. This whole area is covered in them, the whole landscape, and it must have been an amazing civil engineering achievement back in the day when it was done. But a lot of them are silted up and collapsing. The ones on this site aren't. But the trouble is, I'm using a completely different form of water collection here. You know, I want to control it myself, whether it's intended or not, whether I want it to or not. That water is constantly leaving the site, and I don't want it necessarily leaving the site. You know, in dry conditions, and if it suddenly bangs down with rain, I want to be able to keep as much of that on the surface as possible, not something below the ground that's running whether I want it to or not. So when I find them, and I find them fairly often, I fill them in and stop them working, which is fine. I mean, I'm not really affecting anyone. The top of our field here is pretty much the ridge line, so there's no one else's water coming onto our site. That's not a problem. And below us, well, I'll show you now. There was one that we intercepted while digging this pond. Now here, that was a bit of recycled pipe that I found in a ditch that had bounced off the back of a lorry and was just going to sit there forever, so I salvaged that, and I've put that vertically, but in the bottom of that, only going down about, what, 2 foot, a bit less, about 18 inches or so maybe, there's a horizontal clay pipe. It comes in over there, goes out over there. So what I've done is I've put that in, and that sets the level of the water through this whole pond. Aren't these lovely? They're going to be beautiful this year. Looking forward to seeing them. Yeah, so that sets the water for the whole site. Now at the moment that goes into the existing land drain system and takes it off, you know, way across the greater landscape. My current plan is to have at the bottom here a much larger pond than this. Kind of a creative garden, so I'll have banks around it that I'll be able to grow on. It'll be a really sheltered space, so I can get away with putting, you know, quite fragile perennial veg and bush systems and things in. So yeah, this is going to be massively earthwork, but that's a later job. Today my job is, because that berm's going to go, I'm going to move all the stone off it, because that's an actual, you know, those are assets I can reuse. All of this edge here, which was only meant to be temporary, as I say, this was kind of a proof of concept really, to see if it would work. I'm really pleased with it. I mean, you can see the growth on these berms is amazing. So as we transition through and put in things that we want on it, actually productive stuff, there's a couple of bushes in there, they're very young, so you can't really see them much, but so there we go. There's a little rosemary. Yeah, there's a few things like that. There's some sage here somewhere. Where are we? Ah, there it is. See, there's some sage. You can just see it there. So that'll do all right as it is. It's quite high up on the bank, so of course the herbs that like it quite dry, so I wouldn't want to put them lower down. So yeah, by the time this is done next week, these benches. Now this one I'm quite pleased with. I've built a few different styles just because my thinking was originally, if I just put some stone against the berm there, they'll absorb heat during the day with the sun, radiate it at night, and it'll be like a temperature moderating effect, like a thermal battery. It probably works, but I figured if I'm going to do that, I might as well set them in and have something to sit on. Now this lot are just on soil, and even with it being heavily compacted subsoil in the depths of that berm there, it still had a fair amount of settling, and they've slumped a bit. This one, I started the same on this side, but by the time I got to that side, I started stacking stone, figuring that'll slump less, and that's been really effective, but you can still see it slumped a bit at the back. So both of these benches need rebuilding. I don't need that many, yeah, I don't need that many seats really. That one there I put there just because I could. I had the stone and the berm was the right shape for it. So I'm going to pull all of that stone out so that doesn't get trashed when I get the digger in. That one I'm probably going to move and turn it more into just a stack of stone. And I'm going to sink a few, like here somewhere. Let's have a look. Hang on. There's a stone under there, so that I can't see it with the straw. So I can step out and I'm right onto the deep water. It's about, what, 4 or 5 feet. It'll be well up to my chest, maybe my neck, down in the centre there. It's silted up a little bit, just because a new pond will, and that's fine. It's like, you know, pond muck and that, it's just part of a healthy ecosystem in a pond. But yeah, it's nice to be able to get close to the deeper water. So this section here is fairly shallow. It's only about 8 inches, and you want shallow sections in your pond, but seeing as I'm going to be, you know, that's where a lot of the plants that take up the nutrient and so on, that, you know, and keep the pond healthy, stop algae growing, that's where they tend to grow, is in that sort of ecosystem, that sort of depth rather. So given that there's a lot of area here going to be taken out, you know, it's going to be about twice the size of this, and quite a bit of that is going to be fairly shallow, so I don't have to worry about putting a dent in that depth of water here. So I'm going to sink another couple of stones there, and I'd like to get a couple, whenever I dig I find big stones here, I'd like to put 1 or 2 around the place that'll be partially in and out of the water, because in winter those stones are where there's tiny little gaps that you know, alongside the ice when it freezes up, and that's what allows for air exchange, gas exchange between the air and the water. So it means your fish will survive quite happily in the water without having to bring them inside and put them in tanks, and just creating an artificial environment for them I don't think is the best thing for them. I think they're probably better off out here, and it's just less work. I've got enough to be doing. So yeah, all this is going to be tickled up a little bit and changed. It's a nice still day for it, but it's not always like this here. So yeah, just basically showing what it is before. I'll do another view afterwards, but there's all sorts of stuff growing. We've got that one there, there's quite a bit of that across the back. That one there is doing quite well, for example. You can just see it there. That's Japanese burdock, Takenagawa burdock, and that's the real, you know, delicious stuff. You know, that's the real quality stuff, because I eat a lot of burdock in Japan, so I figured the native stuff's probably quite good. But if you're gonna put something in and it'll cope with it, and it seems to be doing quite well here, you know, why not use varieties from other cultures that have been breeding it for centuries? That's valerian, true valerian, officinalis. That's the stuff that's medicinal. You can get sedative from the roots and stuff. A lot of stuff here has got medicinal uses as well. But we've got all sorts. There's a lot of willow being planted that'll come up, and there's like a 2-stage protection here. So once, give it a few years, you know, the plants will have grown up, especially the trees, and the idea is that that'll give increased height to the berm, so even in winter it'll give us a much better sort of parabolic effect to the south, taking the sun in. So the idea is that the willow, being deciduous, that'll give us, in summer will give us really high cover, you know, as a full height tree. But I mean in summer this far north, that's far north, the sun comes up there in the morning, travels all the way around the sky and goes down about there. You know, there's and it's mostly directly overhead all day, so we haven't got to worry about shading from large trees. So in summer, when the willow's in full leaf, it won't be a problem. You know, everything behind it, like the other pond, will still get plenty of sunlight to it, and the plantings around it will still be able to do their thing. But in winter, when the sun's much lower, of course, what we've got is a situation where the leaves will be off the trees, so the light will be able to come through for the most part anyway. You know, branches bounce a bit back, but not much. And below that, as an understory, we've got this. This is Ebbing silverberry. It's like an autumn olive, but it's truly evergreen. It drops its leaves for about, well, when the new leaves start coming in, it drops them leaves, really rich in nitrogen. So that gets everything else to grow quite nicely as it rots down. They're quite young yet, but they're really thriving here. I mean, before the undergrowth came up, that's all there was. And they're very, very wind fast. Look how many slugs have been hammering them. Well, that'll do it. But yeah, they were doing really well. Even with none of the undergrowth up, they were pretty much just doing the job on their own, very exposed, but they cope with the wind really well. They cope with dry conditions really well. So on the top of the berm like this, they're fine. And I mean, that was a tiny little thing last year. They're really coming on, and I've got quite a few of them on berms all over the place. So yeah, here's one you can see better, and that's really good. Tough plant. I mean, a lot of the stuff that's meant to be wind fast really isn't. You know, wind fast relative. And hang on. Oh, I'm gonna sneeze. Oh no, that's annoying. Right. Yeah, it's doing really well here, and in winter, and the wind's coming in, and you can see here, I mean, from the top of the field you can see it even more extreme, but all the way around, that's the horizon. There's very little between us and it, so when the wind blows, it catches us. And as I say, we've got thousands of trees planted around this site. You can just see there's a row of willow, and there's all sorts of stuff inside it. So once they're up, they'll do their thing, and they are starting to grow well this year. Last year being a drought year, as I said, nothing did very much. This year, the survivors are doing really, really well. So that'll really start to make a huge difference in a few years. But in the meantime, these things, they're doing really well, and they'll come up to a couple of meters and probably stop. So it'll still add as they spread outwards as well, because they'll spread to a couple of meters wide. They'll complete this berm, make it effectively a couple of meters higher, really give us a huge amount of protection, and we can grow more delicate things. Another thing that's really frost sensitive, one of the few downsides to building a crater is that in winter it can act like a cold well. Now out on the swales, and the swales were like the same, they'll intercept that cold air and it'll run along the swale, it'll pool in the ponds and keep them cold, but that's really not a problem. I mean, in winter the ponds freeze over, well that's fine, most of them are 3-4 foot deep. Anything that's got any sort of fish life in is really deep, so they're not going to freeze completely. We always have a certain amount of gas exchange, and it's just not an issue here. It just doesn't get that cold. Hang on, there's something moving down in there. But for the far north of Scotland, it's pretty mild here. Of course in summer we get a load of sun. One of the limiting factors, it's like 20 hours of daylight. The limiting factor is the wind, and this will be nicely protected. So 20 to 22 hours of daylight every single day in the middle of summer, and a nice protected space. This is going to be very productive, and with access to decent water as well. Yeah, it's going to be good. So yeah, this is as it is. I'll do another video when we've finished it.